presentation by the New Hartford Historical Society, and thank you all for coming. This is an incredible crowd. This is probably double what we've had. So thanks for coming out on a somewhat nice Wednesday evening. The presentation is fantastic. Everybody's here, I think, because they're passionate about the old mill and the blacksmith shop. Some folks might not even realize there's a blacksmith shop next to the old mill, but he was going to do a presentation for us. Bill Housley has worked for us for about the past 5 years, doing assessments of the blacksmith shop, and now the assessment of the old mill before it comes down. The Historical Society has been working with the Roth family for about 5 years on a preservation and restoration effort for the blacksmith shop. It's a treasure that we don't want to lose, and I think you'll see through the presentation, through Bill's enthusiasm, that it has a lot to offer, not only to New Hartford, but to many areas, industry, ironwork. It's kind of a microcosm or a snapshot of America. The Goffs are here, Scott Goff is here with us tonight, and his uncle Alan Sedgwick, who are both going to be stars in the program. Bill Housley has about 30+ years of experience in the history world. He's president of Terra Firma. Bill was co-founder of the Greater Hartford Arts Council. He's done this sort of work for the Landmarks Association. He was a circuit rider, which is how we first got involved with Bill. The presentation should be about an hour. We have a wine and cheese reception afterwards at the Historical Society. We always have it after. In the back of the room, we have a sign-up sheet for email. So please give us your email address so that we can get electronic notice of these presentations. We're going to continue these sorts of presentations throughout the year. It's kind of our way of giving back to you. Speaking of which, it's our way of giving back to you at no cost, but there is a donation basket in the back if you'd like to make a donation. I made a very generous one just so people would think that there's a lot of money. 20s, 10s, 5s. I drew the line at 50, but it's there, and your contributions help. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Bill. Thank you.
This is exciting. I never ever get to speak in front of an audience this big. I think it proves that local content matters, and your outlet's also timely and newsworthy, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. Hey, I'm not Ken Burns, but I also don't charge $10,000 a minute to create documentaries, so you tell me if this works out for you. I had to learn some new tricks to do this, because I've integrated some video and some audio. I never quite figured out how to get the video part. The audio is what matters most, because Scott and Alan and the people that I did the oral history interviews with were mostly sitting, and I've got some still pictures. You'll see what they look like. But the sound is what matters most. If I have to tinker with the sound on my slightly amateurish sound system here, bear with me. Some of this is spoken word, and some of it are, again, oral history interview tapes, excerpts from about an hour's worth of conversation that we had several months ago in the context of preparing for this. So let's start right out and see where it goes.
The history that I know, the history that Scott knows, is a history that we've gotten from my father, a history that he's gotten from his aunt. This is just history that we've heard about, just to still be a part of Bakersfield. My biggest thrill in 2004 was when I was able to buy a house back in New Hartford after living in Detroit for 18 years. And to buy a house back on Gillette Road, 4 houses up before I grew up.
Alas, part of the problem here is shown by this.
This is the Bakersfield factory from 1859, just days before its demise. It's going to be demolished, but we're documenting this for the purposes of preservation for the New Hartford Historical Society. And what a national treasure in many, many ways. It was used as a factory, a sawmill, a manufacturing plant, a dance hall. We'll see more on the inside. This blacksmith shop. He was one of the last blacksmiths practicing in the old way in all of New England. And it's an extraordinary complex. And unfortunately, as you can see the issue here is this location, which is not great for anything. The poor factory has been crowded out of its existence by highway development and just this constant stream of traffic. This is one of the busiest roads in Litchfield County. It's just good. You know, you can't even get across to do the rest of this film. It looks like we have a red light here, so with any luck, I can actually get across the street and begin to show you more of what this was. And we're going to go inside now and take a look. And actually, the mill was originally powered by water, and there's a dam up above. But you can see the stream and the mill race. But we're going to go inside and have a look.
A longer version of that is on YouTube. If you type in, search Bakersville Old Mill, you'll get the long version of that tour. Just as an aside, one of the things I learned, Scott was so amusing about this, is it Bakersville or Bakerville? And I actually came at the end of my process to the conclusion that there are almost no exceptions to the rule that throughout the 19th century, it was called Bakerville, not with an S. And during the 20th century, that S slipped in there. It will remain a great mystery why. And I don't know if anyone cares. But here it is. And of course, we know our Connecticut towns were always composed of villages. So that in many cases, they were sort of bigger than the sum of their parts. And the parts each have personalities. And, you know, Connecticut has more towns that end in the word "ville" than any state in the Union, and that's because, I won't turn this into a pop quiz, but I'll give you the quick answer. It's because of water. Because we have mill streams everywhere, and we've got all these great river systems, and you could put a mill up almost anywhere that you could dam up a brook, and that, of course, is the story here. This, again, shows the mill is looked about 1930. Blacksmithing is dying out now. The old days of jingle bells is gone. I suppose there are youngsters today who don't know what it is to ride in a sleigh. Interviewed in 1949 at the age of 88, George Warren Jones could hardly have imagined the changes that would take place in Connecticut during the next half century. Youngsters today not only don't know what it is to ride in a sleigh, they can hardly imagine any aspect of the Connecticut George Jones's time. A world that remains substantially the same, dominated by agriculture, small industry, and local economy. From the time New Hartford was first settled in the 1740s until the 1940s, when the automobile age, globalism, and mass marketing and communication transformed the world more rapidly than in any other period in history. If it hadn't happened to us, we might not believe so much change was possible. It makes the preservation of the best and most evocative aspects of the past all the more important. Understanding change, where ideas come from, and how the world we inhabit is necessary for critical perspective about who we are and where we're going. Critical perspective is necessary to an informed and engaged citizenry, the kind that make choices mindfully. Time travel, the sort I'm about to present, strengthens our awareness of other times, not of our own making, and deepens our sense of place, past, and community. This building served a lot of purposes, and we'll see in a moment it was the second building on the site, the original factory, if you will, tannery, a little smaller building powered by water was on this site, burned in 1856. This was built in 1859, and it was like a small emporium for entrepreneurs. They did all kinds of things. At one point, George Jones had 35 men on the payroll, and they did condensed milk, if you believe it. Gail Borden apparently first experimented with that in this building, tailor shop, lumber mill, wheelwright, shingle factory, and we'll get to the dance hall. Since the 1930s, it has been used almost exclusively for storage, but actually, and this just shows kind of the beauty of the thing. All of these aspects of history, it's kind of about observation. And I think if you look closely, I just love when I got my telephoto lens on and photographed the weather vane, and actually noticed that that is not one of these store-bought weather vanes, but something that looks pretty handmade. In fact, actually the arrow tip was made of wood on it, which is pretty unusual. And just shows the beauty of it in all seasons. But the thing that started it really was the damming up of the brook, and the creation of a mill pond. And let's hear Alan Sedgwick talk about ice.
During this period of time, the only refrigeration that we had was ice. There was no electricity. And I still can remember putting electricity in our house up here. And that would have been in 1938 or 1939, before we actually had electricity. Now, before that time, ice was the thing that gave us refrigeration in the summer. There were many ponds that were used to produce ice. This was one of them up here.
Okay. So,
Marsh's Pond was another one.
I mean, did they produce ice commercially, not just for the family to sell?
Basically for anybody that needed ice. And in this case here, this pond up here was used to keep ice in an ice house where the gas station was, which is right next to the school.
This shows, again, the old mill is below, the mill race that connects the mill pond, a power source, a water source to the original water power. You can see the brook, how that's been redirected, water flow toward the factory site. And, you know, this is where it all starts. Actually, the first member of the Baker family, Scott Baker, moved up from Bridgeport about 1810. He was born in the 1770s. And this is how mill villages and industrial activity begins. Somebody with a skill or an aptitude or an entrepreneurial attitude starts something. And if you go to the little Bakerville Cemetery, most of the family members that we're talking about here are buried there, man, wife, different generations. Scott Baker, his son Anthony, I believe, inherited the mill, and then this was his wife. And then his grandson, John Scott Baker, who built this fancy monument, he must have done pretty well, was the one that built the building that we're talking about here. And in the environment around it, if you were to go back there 50 years ago, or 100 years ago certainly, you would have seen all of the components of an economic village. There was a fulling mill, blacksmith shop, brick house, that the bakers lived in on the lower right there, and of course the old mill itself. What I suppose is most famous about the site really is the blacksmith shop, and I think as a preservationist, one hates to lose anything. But the mill, aside from its location, is also big, and there are a lot of issues about the sustainability of it. The blacksmith shop is the opposite. It's a manageable size, and this ought to be something that we truly can save. The remarkable thing about it, of special interest, is George Jones' earliest legend, is the documentation. As I will say throughout this, get back to the blacksmith shop later on, but this is like the best documented thing of its type in the country. They have this legends in count books. By far the largest number of transactions involved shoeing horses, oxen, and cattle. Although the price of the service did not vary over the years, it varied from one animal to the next, suggesting different levels of difficulty. Although 70 and 80 cents, the equivalent of about $20 today, is the most common price for shoeing a horse, some transactions were as much as $1.25. Dozens of additional products and services were recorded, including putting a brace on a wagon, rims on 3 wheels, putting spokes to heavy wheels, fixing machines, fixing sleighs, fixing a hoop tub, repairing wagon wheels, fixing a horse rake, fixing whistle trees, repairing a pole wagon, mending chains, work on a new axle, mend a plow, put brakes on a wagon, new side on a wagon body, make harrows, iron cart wheels, mend steel runners, shoe a sleigh, fanning mill irons, buggy repair, etc., etc. One can see in this that Jones's shop functioned almost like a modern automobile mechanic shop, handling a variety of needs related to transportation. One of the more expensive transactions described as ironing cartwheels for $11.50 is today's equivalent of $250. Jones's account book documents transactions with more than 100 individuals who are named by name, most of whom probably lived near Bakersville. Most transactions were paid in cash. It is likely that other transactions, especially in an increasingly cash-based economy, never made it onto the books because they involved people from out of town who might not be regular customers. Despite the prevalence of cash payments, many other transactions involve traditional bookkeeping barter, in which goods and services were exchanged for goods and services, with accounts continued over many years. For example, Jones occasionally took payment in potatoes, carrots, turnips, plowing, chickens, cider, apples, cords of wood, bushels of onions, drawing brick, and drawing coal. As recently as 1950, most residents of New Hartford continued to participate in the economy of agriculture. Certainly 100 years ago, New Hartford would have been predominantly agrarian, and this is what Jones's business reflects. It's a world we have lost, and that is best remembered by preserving and presenting authentic and evocative treasures like this shop. And this shows his bill had certain accounts, and again, this documentation is hard to overstate the importance of having the contents and the documentation together. And the story starts with John Scott Baker's mill, which, as I say, replaced his grandfather's tannery. And so let's look inside. And part of this project was to document the building before it was removed. And I am a photographer, and I did a lot of photography. These are large resolution, the ones that I've made. If you want to do an exhibit someday, you could blow these things up poster size. Some of them are more beautiful, I think, than others, but it was thrilling for me to spend a day with my camera and tripod and really try to capture the beauty and essence of this building. This is the workbench and details, another workstation in a building designed to do many things at once. Line shafting, they call it a steam mill. And interestingly, even though many of these early mills were on locations near water sources, as soon as coal, railroads, and steam engines came to pass, people replaced that water power, which had issues, you know, in the winter it's a little rough to get the water wheel going. So they could do steam-powered mills year-round, and they would put sometimes steam engines. I don't know, maybe Scott or somebody knows when the steam engine was removed, but there must have been some power machinery in the building to power the line shafting. And you can see these wheels. The wheels would transmit power from the engine to these rotating devices, which would, with leather belts, operate machines. So there was a lot of machinery, I'm sure, in this building that hasn't been there in years. Probably much of it was removed. I always see these as archaeological sites. You know, people think of archaeology as getting out the dirt and digging holes in the ground, but archaeology is unpacking and analyzing anything that has this kind of situational integrity. There is, nothing has been brought in here. Everything pretty much that you see came about as a result of the work that was being done there. And I say, sort of, it pays to pay attention to details. I just love this little 1925 license plate, probably covering a hole in the wall, but who knows. And, you know, little things like this, I didn't make the time or have the time to evaluate, but this was a photograph, possibly of a family member, possibly somebody in the parlor of the brick house next door that was on a shelf. Let's go upstairs. Now, the staircase, I don't think anyone's really taking their life into their hands, but it's, you know, it's not straight, and some of the stairs didn't seem like they were quite connected to the wall, so we kind of clawed our way up there, but it was worth every second of it. And the things, the ephemera, every object, every visual thing tells a story. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of the very famous Johnstown flood disaster. It was like the Titanic. It was one of the biggest news stories of the century. This is a broadside. I don't know what it's exactly promoting, whether there was a play or it wouldn't have been a movie in the 1880s, but exactly what it's about. But it talks about people being swept away in Johnstown. That's all that's left of it. I mean, it's faded, but you get up to the second floor, cobwebs, vines, wheelwright parts, and all the things that went along with the business at hand. And, you know, the vines, again, this building is a costly thing to maintain, and it hasn't had any really important. I mean, it's been used for storage, but beyond that, it hasn't really had much use in 75 years. So, you know, the vines and the different problems that arise, but you can see that. And again, they must have been making carriage seats and wheels. There was a wheelwright shop, and you get lots of little bits of evidence of that in some of these pictures. Machines and hand tools and machine tools. And they're probably that wonderful, I don't know whether that was a bandsaw or just what that was on the left there, but there probably were more than a dozen large machines like that in the building at one time. My guess is that's part of what the steam-powered mill did. But then traditional tools like a grinding wheel there. There was a shoemaker that operated. And again, these were entrepreneurial Yankees, anything to make a buck. And if you've got somebody that is looking to do a little business and he needs like a little corner of a shop, come on down. Everybody could kind of bring their enterprise into this building. And of course, George Jones and his father and the people who ran it, John Scott Baker, before all themselves had enterprises and ideas about ways they could make money to keep it going. The bookkeeping desk, I think, is great. There was a little ballot. I love some of these little bits of ephemera. This, I believe, I figured out was from the election of 1940. And of course, the counting house desk in and of its own right was interesting. And you go through there, you can see the mice have been in there and chewed up certain things. But that ballot is still intact. And I love this. Republican, Democrats, Socialist Labor Party, and Communist Party. We're all doing business here in New Hartford. In 1940, at the end of the Depression, but there's Warren Jones, the blacksmith's father, running for public office as a Republican in town there. So you can see the little purple there. I've identified that. And then I just love this. This was a couple royal weddings ago. This was not Will and Kate. This was not Charles and Diana. This was Charles' mother, Queen Elizabeth, getting married to Philip in 1947. And they still had the newspaper account from the Torrington Register stuck in the counting house drawer. I don't know what the Lady Social Service Circle of the Nepaw Church was up to or what year that was, but I see the word pie. And that's a good thing, generally, you know, pie.
I would say social function for this neighborhood, really. So I'm sure whether you had political rallies here or dances, there were dances here every Saturday night, I know that.
Well, even the graffiti on the wall will say dance hall tonight, and there's names that have been written on there. There was one that we started 1859.
This is the prize in the Cracker Jack box. I have been around historic resources for almost 40 years. I worked for the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation. I've seen lots of old factory buildings, and I know there was this tradition sometimes, even in Hartford, Connecticut, because these were often the biggest spaces in town before they had other kinds of big social spaces, where some of these factories did occasionally double in social uses, but this dance hall on the third floor is sort of an astonishing space and an astonishing discovery in many ways. Jones's Dance Hall is known. This is looking west at the proscenium, and then this is looking east at the cloakrooms and stair door. They had plays, Punch and Judy shows, political rallies, magicians, Christmas parties, community activities for the church and schools. And one of the accounts in local history talk about people carrying tables, dishes, water, and everything for a meal up 2 flights of stairs so you could have, again, entertainment and food. This was really the social center of the town, and it's just a breathtakingly beautiful space. I just love some of these images. And of course, it's a little worse for wear, but plaster is so beautiful. It's different than sheetrock, and it's just a beautiful thing to uphold and to witness. And this is kind of what it looks like on its last legs. And in the men's cloakroom, these beautiful grain doors, and you can see the painted decoration. This is all hand-grained work. So this was a really formalized space. You look at the space we're in here, and in fact, when this was built, I'm just looking at it, I don't even know, but if you told me this was 1890 or so, that wouldn't surprise me. Before this room existed, that was probably the best public space in town. And I just love the sort of broken melodeon made in New Haven. You know, and again, the whole thing, all the little bits of ephemera just kind of speak to the localism of the ages and localism of the economy that people lived in. They shopped locally, things were manufactured locally, and they understood that their world, in many ways, was circumscribed by an economy that was far, far, far from global. These are views inside those cloakrooms. Still looks like a little coal stove there in the ladies' cloakroom, and you can see out beyond to what might have, you know, been in the next room. And just little details: Colt and Company clothiers in Winstead. I assume this is it was a barometer, I guess a thermometer of some kind, a little advertising item. And the most wonderful thing is really this graffiti. I tried as best I could to document as much as I could. There are at least 50 elements of graffiti on the building. This is actually the most recent one that we found, and this is actually Alan Sedgwick when he was dating his future wife, Jane Smith, and that was July 4th, 1942. And that was one of the most recent. But you look here, you can see Barnett's exhibition of dissolving views, 1873. Professor C.J. Scoville of Torrington, dance master. And I don't know who this guy is. I think that says John. But little bits of graffiti, little cartoons. P.F. Bremen, May 9th, 1891. William and Lydia Hale, 1889. Aaron Gates, Seth Higby, Ira Morgan, and more. Names on a wall, lost to time. The beauty of history is if one had the determination, you could find something about every one of these people. They appear in the census records, and usually, if you're really resourceful, you can track down occupations, addresses, all kinds of information. So in a sense, this is like a scrapbook of civic memory. It tells you not only who were there, but sometimes suggestive of relationships between people. Warren's birthday, 1819-26. Bakerville, oh yeah, 1877. That's one of several instances where you can actually see the word. Do I have that right? Maybe I don't. Yeah, Bakerville in the upper left there, no S. 1877, and there are many, many on maps and other things that show that. But Asa Burdick, New Hartford, 1883. Who are these people? And then this was a fascinating little riddle. I actually finally figured out that Albion, New York, is between Rochester and Buffalo. Now, given that 99% of the names that are connected with this building, either in graffiti or the documentation of the count books, are people that live within 20 miles of here, you wonder, what's Albion, New York? Who was S. Bacon of Albion, New York? I suppose that too could be determined. George Jones, I mentioned the blacksmith shop. Let's listen to Alan Sedgwick on this.
There was a conversion from horsepower to tractor power. Tractor power meant that there was always something that was breaking one way or another, or something that needed sharpening. So whether it be chains, or whether it be chisels, or whether it be post hole diggers, or you name it, any of this kind of work was part of the work that my grandfather would do. Now, during the 30s, there was no ox shoeing or anything like this in any way whatsoever. But horses were a factor, especially riding horses. And I can remember Mrs. Devine, who was up on top of this little backwards, and the summer camps where there were camps that had horses for the camp dampers do ride.
While the story is substantially about George Warren Jones, it doesn't begin with him. Jones himself believed that the blacksmith shop was built by a hairy woman who was succeeded by Aaron Gates, who was succeeded by his father, Warren Jones, who died young, leaving the shop to George in 1889. The shop dates no earlier than 1810 and possibly as late as 1830. Today, there are few, if any, surviving 18th century blacksmith shops in America, although the form and functions of the Jones shop would have changed little from the generation of the American Revolution. Although most blacksmith shop production does not end up in museum collections and only occasionally rises to the level of art, no trade or occupation is more essential to the well-being and sustainability of 18th and 19th century agrarian communities. Indeed, blacksmiths were so important that early settlements offered grants of land to encourage blacksmiths to settle. Agriculture, the basis of all early New England settlements, was impossible without the tools and technology to make and repair tools, shoot oxen and cattle, and more. A good blacksmith accommodated himself to the particular needs of the locality he served. Mechanical engineering and machine tool manufacturing, two of the most critical skills of the industrial age, are rooted in blacksmithing. The shop was one of the last traditional blacksmith shops to remain in operation continuously from the time of its origin. From the time of Jones' death in 1955 until the present, his descendants have barely disturbed the contents. It is a remarkable time capsule, all the more so because in addition to the building and a collection of perhaps 1,000 artifacts, Jones' business records also survive. There is nothing like it. The shop is, simply put, the best documented, most authentic early blacksmith shop that has come down to us from the pre-industrial era. There are perhaps 100 or more blacksmith shop buildings in the United States today, early blacksmith shop buildings. Some restorations, some reproductions, most long ago stripped of their contents, and many of them relocated or extensively altered. An article that appeared in the Waterbury Republican profiled George Jones in 1949 at the age of 88 and noted that his shop was unelectrified and lit with old brass lamps, that his business turns out horseshoes, door knockers, fireplace pokers, and knickknacks for the carriage trade. For farmers, he pounds out chain hooks, staple pullers, wrecking bars, whiffle trees, neck yokes, and door handles. The article also noted that Jones rarely moved about and lived in his present home just a step away from the shop. A snug house with a back porch full of nice seasoned firewood. And how in 1894, Jones married Miss Jenny Wheeler of Harwinton. So again, it shows how localized this world and economy were. After World War II, George Jones really was kind of colorful because he was sort of the last of the Mohicans, and there he was in his 80s and early 90s, still maintaining this blacksmith shop, and they began writing articles, and photographers would come out. So there's this wonderful documentation as well about the curiosity, in a sense, and really almost a tourist attraction that the Jones shop had become. Inside, the forge was rebuilt several times and was the functional core of the operation. And again, in addition to shoeing horses, cattle, and oxen, they made all kinds of products there. Here's the bellows that stoked up the forge. Many original features intact. It looks as if George Jones walked out the door yesterday. The shop products on display: George Jones anvil and hammer, as if set down in 1955. The core of the business was shoeing oxen and cattle. This is the ox sling as it was about 1950 and looks today remarkably preserved. And I have two wonderful, audio clips of Alan Sedgwick.
This was my first year in high school. That a man by the name of Philip Buell, who had brown Swiss oxen. And oxen were animals that were used at all of the fairs around for their drawing contests. So they had a lot of competition with oxen. So Phil Buell heard a leather sling that has to be used to get an animal off of its feet in order to put shoes on. It is a key. If you shoe a horse, you can lift up one of his feet and he will stand on the other three. But if you try that with an oxen, they will not stand on the other 3 feet. They will try to lean on the foot that is up. So it required a stall to have them come into. Now that stall was one that was similar to a cow stanchion. It was for one animal. There were benches on each side, front and back, where an animal's foot could be lifted up and strapped on. And then those shoes could be nailed on appropriately.
Again, all that background noise is the traffic. It was, we were trying to capture these stories in the building, but it was impossible to get it here.
It wasn't but a short time after that all of his competitors, Phil Bill, found out about my grandfather having an oxen, so that he really ran quite a business in shoeing cattle for fairs especially, to the extent that all of the inventory that he had from factory-made shoes, I guess that's the word that they use, all were used up. And he attempted to get more shoes by writing to Cape Well and some of the other manufacturers at that time, all of which had gone out of business. So then the grandfather said to me, he said, Alan, if you will strike for me, which means that one person standing on one side of an anvil and the other person on the opposite side that heats the iron and that stuff, striking means taking a piece of iron out of the forge that has been heated to a cherry red or even a little bit more, and then working it with hammers to get it molded into the shape that you want. He says, if you will strike for me, he says, we will make shoes the same way as what I made shoes for my father back in the 60s before they were manufactured shoes. So he ordered an awful lot of 1 1/8 by 1/4 inch bar steel from Hartford. And those rods would all come in by way of E.J. Kelly, who had a trucking business at that time.
Chain-driven truck.
Chain-driven trucks.
What are the chain-driven trucks?
Mack trucks. Mack trucks.
That had a conventional rear end. They had big, large roller chains for the rear wheels.
And the tires were solid rubber tires. There was no tubes or anything in it. So anyway, we went to making shoes. And we made lots of shoes. And that was the experience that I had.
And what years was that?
1938, 39, 40. This is when I was going to high school.
And again, Alan Sedgwick speaking there was again essentially apprenticing to his grandfather, who had apprenticed to his father, who was born in the 1830s, I believe. So it's quite a sweep of history. And you can see this is a shop, a little business office that was attached to the shop, and an outhouse attached to the shop. And again, that documentation I mentioned is so impressive and important. And again, there's no S in Bakerville. But there is in the one of 1900 at the top. And if you look at the one below from 1890, no S. So who knows? This is, again, just, there is another surviving blacksmith, abundant of preserved contents and collections. Just amazing stuff to see and think about and learn from. And I love this, this sort of slice of life, a place in time, details of politics, World War II, calendars, news stories, things that are tacked on the wall, not by curators or for display, but because the last time they were being used or were new, they were just put there, and that's the way it is. I love this George McLean, and I think I saw Herbert Hoover Guess you know what side team they were batting for. It's okay. And, but it's just interesting, these political broadsides and the axe handles. And in the Harwinton Fair, I love this, in George Jones's daughter, Ethel Bartholomew, who wrote a history of Bakerville, talked about the Harwinton Fair and how exciting it was. The kids, they'd go off in a wagon, and as they got up to the hill and looked down into the village, they'd see the tops of the tents, and they'd come down, and they would see friends and exhibits and animals and ox bulls and sawing contests and bands and wheel games, and it was all big-time entertainment. Still is, but that's what they had in those days, and that's about all they had. They didn't have televisions. And just some interesting oddball things that you wouldn't normally find. The advertising umbrella from a clothing company in Winstead. And I don't know when Canton Springs Cola went out of business, but there were a lot of local soda pop and soft drink companies, and those, just a collection of bottles. And as I say, photographers, there's more than this, but these are some of the pictures when the shop really became kind of almost a tourist destination in the 40s and 50s. This is what it looked like at the time. This is what it looks like today. It looks like it needs some repairs, but it's actually in pretty remarkable condition. The roof is very much intact. Needs some work, needs some TLC, but that's what it is. Where will you ever find another? How many towns in Connecticut have the nation's best of anything? This is the best documented, most intact blacksmith shop in America. It's no accident that all the famous historic restorations from Old Sturbridge Village and the Henry Ford Museum to Colonial Williamsburg and Storrington and West Springfield all own and operate blacksmith shops. The public love watching a traditional blacksmith work. That said, properly developed, New Hartford would have something quite marketable that, in addition to being fascinating, could become a magnet for tourism, experiential learning programs, and tours, where other trades and traditional technologies might be staged for special events and other kinds of activities. As I say, what inspired us years ago can inspire us again. And it's interesting, I don't know how many of you have been there, but next door, really in Torrington, the Torrington Historical Society does a good job, and they've got some neat things, including the Hendy Machine Shop. People say, gee, where can you learn about the machine age and the industrial technology of the 19th century? There's no better place than what they've done with the Torrington Historical Society, because Torrington became kind of the next generation, next scale-up industrial center. The potential exists for a resource like the blacksmith shop to become a highly distinctive destination, again, for school groups. Partnering up with the wonderful Hendy Machine Shop of the nearby Torrington Historical Society would enable that partnership to offer as good an introduction to the industrial and pre-industrial technological age as can be found anywhere in New England. An offering that could be linked to the curriculum of schools in ways that would not only make this a very special part of growing up in Hartford, but something students from miles away would visit and see. I'm about to close this last, I think this last audio tape has almost nothing to do with the mill, but a great deal to do with what I refer to as our sense of place, our sense of community and civic identity. Every community has a personality. These things are easily distinguished. We ignore them, I think, at our peril. Let's listen to what Alan, Scott, and his cousin Tom have to say about raggies.
Being called Wakefield Raggy is almost a badge of honor.
What do you mean by raggy? What is a raggy?
It's just that everybody knows what raggy is, you know.
No, not necessarily. It's a very local term. Is it really? Now let me come into here. Okay. During my time, raggy was always considered to be poor people that lived up on the mountain somewhere. Bakersfield here, right here, we were not raggies. You never realized. Tommy said we were, but we were not raggies when I was here. But the Serdans and the people that were up there on the hill lived off. Well, we preferred those to
Hartford is a beautiful and interesting place, but like most places, there is a challenge in being noticed, making a name, and controlling your destiny, image, and identity. Downtown New Hartford is very attractive. Pine Meadow has some great architecture and distinctive attractions like Ski Sundown, Lake McDonough, and Pine Grove Cemetery. The old mill is now gone or almost gone. It is actually the frontispiece of the history section of the town's website. There's a little piece of me that kind of wishes the internationally significant collection of ski history and art that the late Mason Beakley built and preserved now at Mammoth Mountain, California, had remained in town. I guess the point is that these things only move in one direction. I wish I could say that every generation going forward was likely to add something to the mix that generations of the future will cherish and wish to preserve. There are many days when I wonder if we're doing that. I am absolutely certain our ancestors did. Thank you very much.
It's not like Bill likes his work.
Yeah, any questions, Robert? Yep. Yes.
Mother, I can't remember what her name was, but she played the musical Saw.
Ethel Bartholomew.
Ethel Bartholomew played the musical Saw.
Yeah, I haven't ever seen anyone else do it, and I thought it was very interesting that she did that. And I don't know where she learned it, Ellen. Oh.
There was a person in Torrington, I can't come up with his name right now, that could play the saw, and it was from him that Mom learned how to play the musical.
Bill Clark.
And so I had pictures at home of her going to Harrington and playing the saw for some of the kids that were there at the school.
And she had it all decorated too.
She did it.
She what?
She had it decorated with flowers and
Oh,
she had
good.
painted
She played it at a green.
That's great.
A lot,
Comments, observations? Yes.
I just wanted to say, I read Ethel's book, and one of the things that she said that George Jones did in the pin, she was also the town dentist. People went there.
Yes. You know, I've heard that for some reason Blacksmiths did dabble, not just here, but in dentistry, maybe because they had lots of little tools they could use.
Let me verify that. You had one shot in here that showed a sewing machine that really was a grinding wheel.
Yes.
All grinding wheel. Well, just in back of that, there was 2 pair of pliers. And those were the pliers that were used to extract teeth.
Oh my.
Now, in our town, there were the Ballards. And the Ballards had quite a few kids. And they were not the richest people in the world, to say the least. But Mr. Ballard was a carpenter, and the kids were part of our group together. And one time, Frankie Ballard had a tooth that was really bothering him. So Ed Ballard had him go up to see George Jones, the blacksmith. Went in, got a pair of those clippers, cranked it, and and I'll bet you the price was right.
A strongly worded letter to the congressman, and maybe we can fix the healthcare situation. I'm pretty sure that worked. Yes.
All these items, where are they going?
Well, that's the big question for all of you. I mean, I think, and again, Scott and the family, as I understand it, there is a strong desire on their part to preserve this, but they can't do it alone. So this is, you know, and look, I mean, the point that I often make, you know, I've worked at Hartford. I watched the state pour hundreds of millions of dollars into things like the Science Center and the Convention Center and all this stuff that may or may not be good. I'm not wildly in favor of the state dabbling in these things, but since they do, get your piece. I think that if the town and your representatives in the General Assembly work together. It's not a huge amount of money, but to preserve this thing will take some money, will take some effort, and the state ought to help, not because New Hartford is owed any great favor, though well you might be, but because it's so important. There aren't that many things that Connecticut can point to, again, which are the best of what they are in the nation. So it's almost a favor to them. And if your representatives in the General Assembly either are too busy to be bothered or don't get it, elect new representatives. That's what democracy is all about. And let's get the job done.
The Historical Society has been working with the Goff family, as I said, for the past 5-6 years to put together a plan to preserve. The biggest thing is we can restore the Blacksmith shop, it can be rebuilt, it can be preserved, but what do you do with it then? You need to have a plan, and that's one of the things that I'll ask this group. If there's anybody that's interested in volunteering to work on a committee to actually work towards, we've talked with reconstructions, we've talked with land use folks. We have some good foundations, but really, where do we take the Blacksmith shop? So what do we do with it after we rebuild it? What do we do with it after we've cataloged everything that's in there? The Goff family has been extremely patient working with us. We have some new board members. We've got one that's got a lot of experience doing this sort of thing, and she's volunteered to kind of lead the way. But we do need folks to really sit down, do things like Bill said, find out what resources are out there. There are blacksmith federations and brotherhoods that would probably die over something like this, to have the opportunity to work in a blacksmith shop that had been a working blacksmith shop for 200 years. So if there's anybody there, see me afterwards on the sign-up sheet with your email. Just put a little asterisk for me to contact you. We'd love to really get this going. We focused, I've said before, we focused the past couple of years on getting out of Greystone and relocating and rejuvenating the Historical Society. Now our focus is really going to be, or my focus will be, what do we do with the Blacksmith shop and how do we preserve that? And more importantly, how do we present that for future generations? Because it's just amazing to take a walk through. The pictures are fascinating, but to actually walk through, and the bellow is this big. It's not one that you're using for your fireplace. And the oxen sling is just incredible that somebody thought of, we're going to put a loop under it, and 100 and some years later, the oxen sling is still there. And you could probably walk an oxen in, you'd have to restring it, I'm sure, but walk an oxen in and do the same thing all over again. Those sorts of things, they get me excited. I'm sure they get blacksmiths excited. Bill said, the industrial age, these guys were the engineers of their time. You needed something, pliers to pull teeth. Made pliers to pull teeth. There was no going to the internet to buy it or going to the internet to get designs. You just designed it. So there's a lot of stuff there. We've got a booklet in the back. It's a 1940 interview of George Jones. We have for sale. It's my commercial. But there's pictures in there from 1940 that if you walk in a blacksmith shop today, everything is the same. It hasn't changed. So it is a treasure, as Bill said. It's a treasure that we really want to do something with. We need help, we need people, and we need commitment. So, again, one other thing. We have a number of people, it's pointed out to me that we have a number of people who are Baker descendants. By a show of hands, how many people here are descendants of the Bakers?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's great. It's neat. I mean, that family line, we have a couple of pages that are built back to the Historical Society, too. Research just on the Bakers from first Baker on down. So if you're interested in that, we've got that as well. And one more thing, we've got the wine and cheese and everything over at the Historical Society. Please come over, take a look at the Historical Society. We're really excited about where we are. We're really excited about the things that we've done, these types of presentations. We have our wine tasting this year. We are having it. It's going to be September 16th. That's ski sundown. We took a year off last year with all the construction that was going on there. But we are going to be having you see some of that type coming out at the end of the summer. So please look us up for that. And we've got a few more of these presentations planned this year. So with your email addresses, we'll get some notices out to you and flyers and just word them out. So watch for us. I'm sorry?
Yes, just one little observation. Looking at the photograph And yet, that's very prestigious.
It's a profound difference, it really is.
It is.
It gives you goosebumps. I know about breaking for one, I just want to reiterate, the emailing list, part of how we make these things, and I'm sure you feel the same way, work, is you get your name on the emailing list, and then people, you know, it's great that the newspapers occasionally cover these things, but they don't always. And if I could plug my own thing, I've got an emailing list. If you're interested in the kind of things, we're doing a Civil War trip with the Connecticut Historical Society. We're going to Rockville, Winstead, Middletown, and Hartford in September. Civil War treasure troves, and I'd love to see some of you in those things too. So put your names down, go have a glass of wine, and thanks again.
Many thanks to Scott and to Mr. Sedgwick as well. Yep. Scott? Scott Goff, owner of the Blacksmith Shop, benefactor of the Historical Society.
Well, thank you, Ben. I just wanted to give you folks just a little bit of just a small update on what's going on. As you probably noticed, the building's being dismantled. We have retained many of the artifacts inside the mill building. The question brought up earlier about that. The graffiti that's on the walls has been saved. Some of the woodwork has been saved. All the things of architectural importance, I guess, the weather vane, the window sash, a lot of the contents and stuff have all been salvaged. So that has not been sent out or destroyed or anything else. So with regard to the blacksmith shop, you're going to notice that we're going to start on the rear wall, on the south wall of the shop. We have contracted with a local contractor to repair that rear wall. So you're going to see some activity at the back of the blacksmith shop. Don't fear, it's not coming down, it's just being repaired. Termites have gotten into the wooden structure there, caused quite a bit of damage. So we're having a contractor who should be starting here in the next few weeks. So you'll notice that going on too. We do plan to work with the folks here at the NewHartford Historical Society. As far as the graffiti and some of the other artifacts from the mill building, we're going to work with that, try to preserve all of that, and we look forward to working with you folks.
We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.